So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Why shouldn't you smoke pot? Why shouldn't your kids smoke pot? Do you have a good reason? Have you ever really thought through it? Did you know that pot from the 1970s is completely different from marijuana today? Why? Because of the THC level in it. Did you know that? What's THC? What's the difference between CBD, THC? Is there any difference? Does it matter? We'll be talking about that and much more later on in Trending. Also, an incredible story of one woman who struggled with infertility and now has 3 children through adoption. And it's pretty incredible the way she was able to come about having this 3rd baby. It all started with a phone call about 7 months ago that changed their life, and she will be with us in just a little bit to talk about her own story. That's Emily Stimpson Chapman, so don't go away. She'll be here in just a little bit. But I want to talk about Lady Gaga. Lady Gaga's dog walker last week was shot for watching her dog. Or should I say dogs? 3 dogs. Lady Gaga has 3 dogs. I know 2 of them are French bulldogs. I'm not sure about the 3rd. But the man was in a street alone crying with the 3rd dog that wasn't kidnapped as he hugged the dog thinking that the dog was shot. And lo and behold, it wasn't the dog that was shot. It was him. He's been recovering, posting on social media. Dog watcher Ryan Fisher was attacked and shot as he tried to resist dog snatchers. There's been a dog snatching, and Cruella de Vil didn't do it. But it was Lady Gaga's dog. Does anyone else find that funny? I'm sorry. Because Lady Gaga could kind of like play a Cruella de Vil type of character. I think it's pretty funny. It was her dog that was stolen. I mean, it's not funny that her dog was stolen, but she totally has a Cruella de Vil type of look. She could be the next Cruella de Vil. Aren't they remaking 101 Dalmatians here coming up? I thought I heard about that. Maybe saw a trailer. I don't know. Disney Plus, everyone's doing a new remake live action of something. But here's the deal. Why are Lady Gaga's dogs so important? Why are people going gaga over these dogs? Well, because apparently French bulldogs from particular breeders can cost up to $3,000 to $5,000 per dog. Would you spend this much money on a dog? I can't understand. I'm not a dog person. I'm not. I have to put that on the table right now and let you know because it's important that I say this. Because sometimes I think my lack of compassion on the dog side, I should just throw it out there. I know there's always that person or a lot of people who unfollow me on Twitter for saying I don't like dogs. My version of a pet is a rock. So I can't understand why people are so insistent about this dog other than the fact that it's worth money. Not only can you resell it, so there's a lot of bulldog theft going on, it's on the rise, but ransom money. And they got a lot of ransom money out of Lady Gaga. Did you hear that she offered $500,000 reward for the return of her 2 French bulldogs? Now guess what? They were totally returned to her. But it does ask the question, what would you spend on a dog? To repair a dog? What happened to putting a dog to sleep when it suddenly costs too much to give it some medical treatment? Or putting it out of its misery because it is miserable? It's interesting to me. This whole euthanizing dogs thing, it bothers me. And it's something that we don't talk a lot about that happens very often. An entirely different subject. Maybe one of these days we'll talk about euthanizing dogs and the difference between euthanizing dogs and people. Isn't it interesting? More people, I think, are more upset over euthanizing animals than euthanizing dogs or people. And similarly, it made me think about this. So when I was growing up, there was one commercial that would just make me want to pull my hair out as a child because I grew up in the pro-life movement. And I saw that if you talked about abortion being a problem, if you objected to abortion, you were completely not in tune with the times, and how dare you talk about that. Yet, over and over again, like a bad infomercial, would be Sarah McLachlan on the television for another commercial with that horrible song. I just played it for myself just to make me mad again about this horrible commercial. I'm sorry. But why is it that we can talk about these beaten, stolen, rescued, abused dogs, but we can never discuss abortion in mutilated children, and we could never put images of mutilated children up? Arms of the Angels, that's the song. Don't remind me. I can't stand the song. But what would it take you? How much money would you have to put out, or would you be willing to put out to save a life? And I think this is part of what makes me think about whether it's the Sarah McLachlan commercial or Lady Gaga's $500,000 reward for the return of her 2 French bulldogs. Well, I was talking to a director of a crisis pregnancy center not too long ago, and I think I mentioned it on air. And she looked at me and she said, Timmerie, I bought 2 cars this weekend for 2 girls who were abortion-minded. That's what it took. A car to save a life. A car to make a woman feel like her circumstances were different enough that she no longer thought she had to walk into that abortion clinic. Would you be willing to buy someone a car? Pay a month's rent? Help them buy a home? Help them get a job? Teach them how to nurse? Let them stay with you for a few months? These are the things that crisis pregnancy centers do. These are things that people such as the Sisters of Life do. These are things that people who are really pro-life are willing to do themselves or help other people in crisis find the resources for. And so when we talk about being pro-life, we can't just say we're pro-life. We actually have to act that way, and we have to live it out. This is so important. Would you also be willing to listen longer than you feel comfortable or desire to? To a woman who's in crisis pregnancy and really she just needs to talk about her difficult situation that got her here. She doesn't really want the abortion, but she feels as if she has no one who she can talk to. No one who she can run ideas by about how to move forward, get ahead, change things in life so that she can provide a better future or a better present moment for herself and her child. What are we willing to do? That's what this Lady Gaga dog snatching really reminded me of. And Karen said this, save the fur babies, but what about the real babies? And it's true, and I think this is the way I felt every single time I saw this Sarah McLachlan dog commercial that was supposed to make me cry as I listened to the Arms of the Angels. But in reality, what we weren't talking about that needed to be discussed was all those little babies who you and I are not willing to do enough for sometimes. Are you willing to go and participate in your local 40 Days for Life campaign? To stand in front of the abortion clinic? To be there, pray with her. Continue to pray for her. This is so important. I've seen lives radically transformed and changed, and I've seen them grow in phenomenal ways. And so this is a challenge to you and I. How can we be more pro-life? By listening to those who are at risk around us and by continuing to have those important conversations. Because it is difficult for crisis pregnancy centers to reach women who are actually in crisis pregnancy. You know why? Because women are popping Plan B like candy. They don't even know when they're fertile or not. They know nothing about their bodies. And so every time they engage in intimacy, what do? The next morning, they take the morning after pill, Plan B. It was interesting. I was on my phone the other day, and I typed in plan, and my phone automatically put in Plan B and capitalized it. That's how often Plan B is typed into the iPhone programming. It's typed in so often that it is automatically turned into a capital P and a capital B for Plan B. In fact, I was just listening to some, we'll talk about it tomorrow on the show. Someone was making a joke about how regular Plan B is, and it was a comedian. And the comedian was talking about how Plan B is so normal that now, in her 30s and 40s, now She goes for a trip to the chiropractor when she throws her back out. But before, the thing that she was running to in her 20s was Plan B. That's Heather McMahon. And I think that's sad that, at a certain point we're like, oh, yeah, it's our back that's hard to take care of. But, it used to be 10 years ago, we weren't running to the chiropractor. We were running to get Plan B the next morning. What can you and I do to find those people in our lives, in our surroundings, even at Target, the grocery store, who are at risk for abortion, who are living a particular lifestyle, and perhaps a simple conversation can plant a seed that might not make a change today, but could make a change tomorrow or the next day. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. I'll be back in just a little bit to discuss why you shouldn't smoke pot and how to talk to your kids about it, and what are the signs that whether it's a spouse or a child might be smoking marijuana. We'll be right back. What do two women have to say about marriage during Women's History Month? How has feminism impacted marriage? For better or worse? This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. Thursday, I'm joined by Dr. Stacy Trasenko. She's back, and we're together to discuss marriage and relationships. Join me daily at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.
We're talking about what you're thinking about. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
I'm back with Emily Stimpson Chapman, who is going through with the adoption of a third child after having faced infertility in her life. Perhaps you've struggled with infertility. Perhaps you're still trying. This is one story that I think is important to hear, to open our hearts, open our minds to the gift of life, in perhaps ways that we're on our terms. This is an incredible story. Emily Stimpson, you can find her on Instagram. We'll tag her. Just find me at relevantradio.com/trending, where you can find a link to Emily. She's an author, a blogger, a regular writer online, many of the major Catholic publications. Emily, thank you for joining me on Trending to share your story.
Thanks for having me here tonight. You got me out of teeth brushing and getting the 2-year-old in pajamas. So I really always owe you a thank you.
Well, I can understand that. I have a friend who has 4 kids under 3 right now. The last set, she started with a honeymoon baby, and the third set were twins. So she has had 4 under 3. You are about to have 3 under 3 here. Can you share a little bit about a phone call 7 months ago that changed your life and kind of how this adoption process started for you?
Adoption is always uncertain. So it's, I always tell people it's like the highest risk pregnancy you can imagine, then, triple it, because there's just so many uncertainties that go into it. But we adopted our oldest son, Toby, 2.5 years ago. And then this last year in 2020, went through the adoption process again and got a call in July that there was a little baby boy in Texas who needed a mom and dad, and did we want to be that mom and dad? And we were on the road in 2 hours. He was in the NICU for almost a month, so we were gone into the middle of August with Beckett. And the week we got home, we got a phone call that our son's biological parents were expecting again. And
your first sons, correct?
Our first son, yes. So our son Toby, the 2-year-old. So they wanted, and they're not able to parent for lots of reasons, and they saw their options as abortion or giving the baby to us. And we're like, okay, give the baby to us. we want the baby. So yeah, so we had a little preemie in our arms, and we're saying yes to the most Irishy of Irish twins here, I guess. But it's a huge blessing. Now, again, we have months to go. You just don't know with adoption. The birth mom has lots of complications with the pregnancy, and it's very stressful. So, I'll sort of rest easy once. We'll know how it turns out. But right now, we're just focused on loving our boys and loving and supporting our first son's biological parents as best as we can, and just trying to trust whatever the Lord has for our family.
So it sounds like, for those who maybe aren't that familiar with it sounds like you've been in an open adoption with your oldest son's Toby's parents and now their second child. What has that been like in terms of the relationship?
Well, in some ways it's more of a semi-open adoption. The birth mother has a lot of struggles. And the birth father has some struggles too, but his are a little more manageable. So he's the one we actually do most of the interacting with. But for, open adoptions change and evolve through the years. So what an open adoption might look like in the beginning is not necessarily what it looked like 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, because you're always trying to be sensitive to both the needs of the birth parents and the needs of the child. Right now, for his birth parents, it's a very painful thing to, they're still grieving the fact that they're not able to raise him. And so the birth father loves to see pictures and get updates and things like that, but it's too painful for the mother, and she's struggling in other ways. But 5 years from now, that could be different. 10 years from now, it could be different. It's really it's mostly about what's best for the child. That's ultimately what will determine the relationship over the long term. And having some knowledge of where they come from is always best for the child. So we have the stories. We know the stories of his birth parents. We're able to talk to him about those. As a 2-year-old can understand it now, and we'll talk to him about it in different ways as he grows. But it's an evolving thing where you're just trying to love everybody involved in the triad, and your heart grows through it. So how do I love this person? Is this challenging me to think differently about someone in a different situation than mine? It's just a chance to pray for them. So we're always praying for his birth parents.
So if you're just joining us, you're listening to Trending with Timmerie. That's Emily Stimpson Chapman joining me now, getting ready to adopt the third baby, expected just weeks from now. And you were literally holding a preemie baby in your hands, saying yes as a crisis pregnancy is ensuing of the sibling of your eldest adopted child. But share with us a little bit the challenges of making it happen to adopt and how actually people stepped up and helped you make your way there, and even the sacrifices you and your husband have made as a family in order to adopt these children.
Well, this is a real problem in the church right now in terms of when we talk about abortion, adoption is always thrown out as the alternative. Like, there's people who would adopt the baby. And there's so many reasons why it's so much more complex than that. But one of the things is that adoption is incredibly expensive. You can adopt through foster care for virtually free, but foster care is not about adoption. Foster care is about family reunification. It's being a temporary shelter to children in crisis.
Mm-hmm. And it's
domestic infant adoption.
Messy. Yeah, it's important to just distinguish that real quick, because it's a really messy difference, even just the fostering system and even the fact that they are trying to reunite a child to a very unhealthy circumstance to the point where they won't necessarily work with you to adopt a child who would be otherwise endangered. And so, people often confuse adoption and fostering. It's a long haul, and it's something that we as Christians need to step up and work on, even in the face of a broken system. But adoption, I want to come back to this, is expensive. And for those people who are struggling with fertility, share a little bit more of that journey.
Well, adoption, the average domestic infant adoption, you hear they say 30 to 40,000, but having gone through this 3 times now and seen lots of potential cases, most cases you see range between $40,000 and $50,000, which is an exorbitant amount of money, especially, if you work for the church. My husband's a Catholic high school teacher. I'm a Catholic writer. So for lots of families, that's just out of the range of what they could possibly imagine. And so you can do things. You can take out a home equity loan, which we've done. You can sell your car, which we've done. We sold our second car. But you almost always have, unless you make a lot more than my husband and I make. I guess if you're Wall Street banker or something, you could drop $40,000 every time you want to have a child. But most people can't do that. And so it makes them feel like it's out of reach. And the Protestant churches are phenomenal at fundraising as a community and people standing alongside each other and saying, yes, we see this as a responsibility to help care for these children. How do we do this? And Catholics, for a long time, we had Catholic Charities, and Catholic Charities made adoption affordable for Catholic families. But unfortunately, due to all of the same-sex marriage laws and anti-discrimination against homosexual laws, most Catholic charities have gone out of the adoption business. So there's no Catholic charities we could adopt through anywhere in Pennsylvania. And there's just this huge vacuum now for helping Catholic families adopt. And I went through a list of about 100 adoption grants when we were getting ready to prepare for this third adoption. And not a single one is run by Catholics. Not most of them favor Protestants, so it's much harder as a Catholic to get adoption grants. And Catholics are always kind of like, oh, really? You need help with your adoption? Now, I've been so blessed. We've had so many people help us, and it's been great to be able to help people understand the cost families are facing. But, my dream would be someday that we've talked with a couple other Catholic adoptive families about this, to be able to start getting grants going in different dioceses and educating parishes about the needs, because foster care is a wonderful option when family reunification is on the table. But there are also times when there are parents who are not equipped to parent any time in the next decade, or who, for very good reasons, don't think they'll ever be able to equip to parent. And we want those kids in good Catholic homes. We want them in homes where maybe there's not a lot of money, but there's so much faith and there's so much love and there's beautiful openness to life. And so how as a church do we help families do this?
This is incredible because this is something, as you said, that's not talked about. And infertility is becoming more and more predominant. People in the church are struggling, and they're spending exorbitant costs on in vitro fertilization. They're not being told helpful information for some about NAPRO doctors who can help treat underlying health issues that are impacting infertility. But on the other end, where you're talking about, people say just adopt. I mean, in fact, we just had a caller call in, Tom from Huntington Beach. He said, he and his wife couldn't have children, and so his priest recommended adoption, and they have 2 children through adoption as well. It is an option, but how do we help people get there? So you literally made this happen in the most grassroots way possible, with an incredible technology, social media. I mean, this is an incredible way to use social media. Share with us how other people helped step up for you to ultimately be able to adopt.
Yeah, well, for our last adoption, so for Toby, we brought extensively, and we had help from friends and family. But when we got around to adopting Beckett last year, we can take a third mortgage out on our house. We don't know what else we're supposed to do here. So I wrote a cookbook, and it's filled with recipes designed for hospitality, and there's essays on hospitality in it, and I made it available to anyone who donated to our adoption fund. And so that did tremendously well and enabled us to adopt Beckett last year. And then when we were getting ready to adopt, getting ready for this next hopeful adoption, I was like, what do I do again? I already did the cookbook, and I decided to just give it a try and see if there were more people out there who wanted the cookbook, and there were. And then I was going to finish up the last bit of the fundraiser because grants have not been working out as we'd hoped. And so I was like, well, I could do another cookbook, or I could do meal planning, and I decided I would just post Lenten Friday meal suggestions, 3 recipes a week up on my blog. And then I said, once we get me to our goal, then I'm just going to give the rest of the money to Sisters for Life. But we actually beat the goal before I could even start doing the blog. So now I'm just blogging for Sisters for Life. So
praise God. So you have what you need in order to proceed with the next adoption. We will be praying for you because I understand it's a high-risk pregnancy. There's been abortion in the conversation, but you are willing to be there and adopt this baby. Now, you said you fundraise everything you have, so anything from this great idea, and for those who don't know, but we're posting links on social media. You can find me at Timmerie, Timmerie, to Emily Stimpson Chapman. You can get your fish-friendly, non-fish-friendly, but no meat recipes. 3 recipes a week are being posted. There are 3 types of recipes that you're posting once a week, and you're offering them completely for free, or people have the option to donate to your tip jar. And can you share with us where you're donating the money and what inspired this?
Sure. The money is going to go to Sisters of Life, which, for those who aren't familiar with the order, are a wonderful order of religious sisters. They were founded in New York by Cardinal O'Connor to just uphold the dignity of life. And they work with mothers in crisis pregnancies. They support these mothers over the long term, because it's not just financial needs these women need. They also need, they have emotional needs. They need to feel loved and supported. Their baby's going to be loved, and the sisters do that. They work with post-abortive women who are grieving. They just do wonderful things in about, I think, 6 cities now across America. And see, I should say 2 things. So on one hand, I had an easier time than some people do raising the money, because I do have a larger presence on social media. People know my writing. But I've also seen people who have no presence on social media, creatively raise money for an adoption. Because I truly believe when God wants someone to adopt, he will make the finances come. Like, one of my friends was adopting a year ago, and they just were scraping by. And at the last minute, she reached out to someone and was like, hey, we're going to have a Marion basket raffle. If you know of anyone, could you just send out, let them know about this? And that person sent her a $10,000 check.
Wow.
And that put them at the limit. So you just never know. And I think being willing to step out there and ask and try to fundraise, God will make sure that the money gets to you if this is what is supposed to happen. Money, all the money is God's. So it's just, he has to redirect it. But for me, what's the hardest is that I can go on social media. I can talk to people and have the help given to us that we need. But there are women out there who are facing a crisis pregnancy, and they don't have their help, or they don't know where to find that help, even though in places it exists. And so they feel like they have no choice but to have an abortion or to place their baby for an adoption. And no woman should ever feel that way. Like, there is always help, and it's out there. And so it's a question of, how do we reach them? How do we get them the help they need? And the Sisters of Life are that bridge between people who have the means to help and the women who need the help. And so for me, working through my struggles, accepting help when I know there's so many other women out there who need help, this is a way where I feel like I can be a good steward of the blessings God has given me with my work and my writing and my social media activity, and really help women who don't have, who don't have $17,000 on Instagram that they can call on and rely on, or who don't have loving families supporting them. And the Sisters of Life are such a wonderful, wonderful group of women, and they'll give those women that help. So if we can give them some money, they can give those women more help, and there can be more mothers who, if they do decide to place for adoption, are doing that freely and doing it knowing that, believing that that's the best decision, and not making that choice, or not making the choice to abort out of fear or belief that there's no help out there for them.
And it's a matter of, what are you willing to ask for? And you were willing to ask people to help you, to tell people what you were looking for, that you were looking to adopt a child and you needed help. And I think so often, both our pride, our embarrassment, our egos can be impacted when we ask other people for help, especially when it relates to money. But God is the provider of all things. And it's so funny, because we were talking about self-actualization a couple weeks ago here on Trending, about how people, ask the universe for things to come to them. Wow, why wouldn't we ask God, who is the creator of all, the giver of all, and who wants every good and great gift for you and I? And he will, if it is good for us, if it is the right timing, he will give it to us. God is so generous, and this is what your story reminds me of. And to hear the story that you are now donating, in the last 24 hours, you've fundraised over $2,400 for the Sisters of Life. 100% of the tip money from your Lenten recipes is going to the Sisters of Life. Now, that's incredible, especially because, not too long ago, I recorded a video with Jubilee Media, and they tend to do this show called Middle Ground, where 3 people debate 3 people on the opposite side on an issue. And I was talking to 3 pro-abortion women. At least 2 of the 3 of them were post-abortive. And at one point, and I don't think during the recording, I don't think this made it into the actual video, one of the girls looked at me and she said, look, I see you there. You're married. You're wearing a nice dress. You're dressed nice. You're dressed all cute. Who do you think you are telling me that people who have had abortions have the resources they need in order to keep their babies? And I just looked at her and I said, I've worked for years in the crisis pregnancy centers, and when a woman needs something and she asks a counselor, she asks a crisis pregnancy center, if they do not already have it, all it takes is an email blast, a social media post, or a phone call, and we have multiple offers for the exact thing that person needed in minutes. God answers prayers. He changes lives, but we have to be willing to ask. And so you fundraising for the Sisters of Life is a great example of getting the resources to places that can help make that difference in someone else's life. So thank you so much, Emily, for sharing this. I will just have, one last question here for you. For those who are struggling with fertility and they've been told by people just adopt, what is your message to those people who are in that conundrum and they feel uncomfortable? Maybe they're not really open to adoption. They're afraid of the price.
I think adoption is not a cure for infertility. They're two separate ways. They're two separate things entirely. And so I think some women, when they hear just adopt, feel guilty because their heart's not in that place yet. And they're like, oh, if I really want a baby, that's what I should do. But it's the exact thing you should not do because first, you have to start the healing from infertility. You have to make peace with the fact that your body is not doing what it wants it to do. For me, that meant stepping back from all fertility treatments for a while before we even began the adoption process. So no more Napro, no vitamins, no special diet, like all of it, no charting. I just had to be done with it. And in doing that, I found so much peace. I was like, oh, okay, I've just been fighting God and trying to wrestle this out of him, and this is not what he wants for me. And it was when I did that my heart really was like, oh, okay, adoption is what we want to pursue. Chris and I talked about it, and then all of the doors blew open so fast for that first adoption. And I think that's what God wants you to do. He wants you to be healed of the pain of infertility, or at least start that process, because it's not something you're going to get over in a week or a month or a year. But to start that healing, make peace, and then think about adoption. Then pray about adoption. God speaks to us through the peace, and so that's what you have to find first before you move on to the adoption process. And talk to people about it. There's so many women struggling with infertility, so many women suffering, and so many, unfortunately, feel like they have to suffer alone, and they don't. So that's my advice. And I will say one thing, we have actually raised $4,000 by today now.
Wonderful.
So we've had a lot of really generous people. So $4,000 for the Sisters of Life in, 12 hours? And we've got four more Fridays of Lent to go that I'll be giving meal suggestions for, so people can leave their tips in the tip jar if they're enjoying the recipes, and we're going to send off a big check to the Sisters of Life, hopefully around the same time the little girl we hope to adopt is born.
Praise God. If you're looking for some Lenten recipes to change it up, that way you don't starve and grab for the Cheetos when we're not supposed to be eating meat. Should we be eating Cheetos on Fridays during Lent or when we're fasting just because we're starving from our fasting? Here's some great recipes and ideas. We'll post a link at relevantradio.com/show notes. I've also tagged Emily Stimpson Chapman in our social media. She's written countless books, from recipes to dealing with eating disorders to much more. So go ahead and check her out. I'll be right back in just a bit. Why shouldn't you smoke pot? And what should you say when your kids want to? And how do you figure out the signs when perhaps a loved one, a spouse, or a child, maybe you're showing signs that they're smoking? We'll be right back here on Trending.
Timmerie will be right back. You can reach her on Instagram and Twitter at Timmerie. That's Timmerie.
Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio Studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/Forester.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Join the conversation. The number is 1-888-914-9149. What do you say when your kids smoke pot? Why shouldn't you smoke pot? You know, I'm no longer in the land of the fruits and the nuts, California. I love California. It's been heartbreaking to leave. Again, I've said this. I can't talk about it a lot. I'm not there yet emotionally. Maybe it's the postpartum hormones. It's also where I've lived my entire life. All my family's there. It's been a very challenging move. But one thing that I was surrounded by growing up in the community that I grew up in, before opioids were a huge crisis, it was a huge problem in my community when I was a kid. We lived in a generational pot smoking community where marijuana was extremely prevalent. It was actually grown in very high quantities illegally where I grew up. And it was really, really challenging to make friendships because so many people, if they weren't smoking marijuana, eventually did. And listen to this. A Finnish study from 2018 looked at over 6,500 participants, and the study ended up revealing that those who used weed more than 5 times raised the risk of psychotic disorders nearly 7-fold. So they were 7 times more likely than someone who hadn't smoked pot 5 times to have psychotic disorders. Schizophrenia, paranoia, a lot of mental health issues from loneliness, depression, anxiety, social isolation. And we'll get into that because you might say, well, don't people smoke pot specifically for these same reasons to help treat these? Well, they do, but, you know, every bad fix or every Band-Aid only works as a Band-Aid for so long. If you don't actually treat the festering wound. And the Band-Aid can actually make it worse if we're not treating what's happening underneath. And so we'll also talk about some solutions here as well. But it's important for us to discuss because marijuana is becoming more and more prevalent. I was in Washington visiting not too long ago, state of Washington, and there are pot shops and dispensaries all over the place. You know, an embarrassing story. So I was driving with my husband, and I was looking at this really cool building that had like all this green logo and very like natural-esque looking kind of presentation and marketing. And I'm like, that looks like a really cool health food store. We should go there. And my husband, what are you talking about? I said, look, right there. We passed it the other day. Like, we should go there. And he's going, you don't want to go there. Well, why not? I do want to go there. He said, no, you don't. And he's kind of just trying to ignore me, like, okay, whatever, Timmerie. And I'm like, Gabe, can you please pull over? I would like to go there. And he said, Timmerie, it's a pot dispensary. I'm like, how do you know? How do you know? I must be clueless about some of these symbols because it completely evades me. They're not health food stores. As I told you yesterday, I'm a total Catholic hippie mama, a granola person. And by the way, I had a bunch of people asking me what it means to be like a granola person. Crunchy means that you're into very holistic things, the natural way, natural deodorant. Some people say we dress like hippies, eat like hippies. We have weird diets of bird food, as my husband used to say, of gluten-free, dairy-free, and so on. So pot shops are everywhere now. It's a new business. If you want to get rich and you don't have any moral qualms, that's the thing to do. But the problem is we do have some moral qualms as Catholics. But the thing is, I think often people think, I want the church to literally spell it out and say, marijuana is a horrible thing for you to do, and you cannot cooperate in any use or distribution of marijuana in order for them to put 2 and 2 together with regard to marijuana. The church doesn't explicitly spell out every single type of sin. Why? Because it gives very, very clear parameters. And it has spoken of cannabis on a number of occasions. And it's spoken about the concern and problems with it, and that it is a violation of our free will. But here's something that the church doesn't do. Well, cannabis in and of itself can cause a violation of our free will because we are under the influence. The church isn't willing to violate our free will. The church is actually willing to say, you know, here are all our guidelines. Here are all our 10 commandments. Now figure it out. Ponder whether you should do or not do something. And so this is where the marijuana conversation really comes to the forefront. And so before we dive much further into this, it's important to make a distinction because people say, well, what about medical marijuana? I have no problem with medical marijuana, nor does the Catholic Church. And it's not what Timmerie has to say about marijuana. The Catholic Church acknowledges for therapeutic and legitimate reasons, drugs can be a good thing. But think about it. Morphine is a great thing to help treat people and ease them from their pain. However, it's not something someone should take every day. There needs to be a legitimate medicinal reason for using marijuana, morphine, or any number of drugs. And people say, well, God created a lot of things. Doesn't mean we all need to partake in them, and doesn't mean we need to use it in excess. And so there's also the importance to recognize the difference between THC and CBD, the chemical makeups of marijuana and what is being extracted and used. Just like the hippie, crunchy people who eat really holistically use hemp seeds now and drink hemp milk, they're not getting high, just so you know. There is absolutely no THC in it. Similarly, in CBD creams and oils and even oral drops that people use, there's not THC in that either. You can't get high off of a CBD cream. In fact, I had a massage the other day. My mom planned this girls' night surprise party for me, and she hired a masseuse to come to the house to give all of us girls massages. And the lady used CBD cream on me. I had never used it before. It was phenomenal. I was amazed at just the work that it did, working all of the knots and everything out. It was phenomenal. And so there are great things that people argue, well, we need to allow medicinal use of marijuana. Well, sure, allow CBD. Sure, allow people who have legitimate medical diagnoses to use the THC components of marijuana and pot. But that's different from recreational use that is so normal. And here's the deal. I mentioned earlier when I started talking about this, that for me, I grew up in a generational pot smoking community. I saw so many of my friends who were lost into hardcore drugs, crystal meth, cocaine, methamphetamines. I saw it all around me. I lost friends over this. I've lost family members over this. And for many of them, where did it start? Just smoking marijuana here and there. We've all heard it before. Just to take off the edge. What's the big deal? Well, as I said before, 5-time use, as a study cited from Finland, increases the risk of psychotic disorder by nearly 7-fold. Seth Rogen has been trending on Twitter because he launched a weed company. Again, weed continues to become mainstream. The Catechism of the Catholic Church has made very clear that we're to avoid every kind of excess. It also makes clear that we aren't supposed to do things that endanger the safety of ourselves and others. And that the use of drugs can inflict serious damage to the human person, to our health, to our life, to our social interactions. It can be gluttonous the way people use food. It can be gluttonous the way people use alcohol. It also can be gluttonous the way people smoke marijuana to just, quote unquote, take off the edge. The Catholic Church has opposed the recreational use of narcotics in all situations. Recreational use is not acceptable, and this applies to marijuana as well. I was reading an article by Rick Fitzgibbons. He's a medical doctor. He's the director of the Institute of outside Philadelphia. And I was really fascinated as he was actually talking about how often this plays a significant role in marriages falling apart. And he has some really helpful tips that we'll get to in just a little bit here that I think are very, very important for us to discuss. Especially if maybe you are raising children, or maybe you suspect that your spouse might be smoking marijuana, signs to look for. But he said this, as a psychiatrist, I've seen increased numbers of young adults who have developed psychotic illness without the usual psychological risk factors. Instead, their histories often revealed one strikingly common factor: the daily use of cannabis. So people are suddenly developing psychological illnesses, psychotic illnesses, with no prior risk factors, no prior signs. And it's coming from regular use of marijuana. You know, something interesting happened not too long ago. All of a sudden, when marijuana was legalized in the state of California, I had friends. I have to tell you, most everyone I know at some point has smoked marijuana. It is so mainstream in California. And I don't know if it's just California. I think it's a lot of places. But in California, it's normal. Everyone has some sort of pot experience. And I remember in college, one of my friends said, I smoked it in high school, swore to myself, I'll never do it again. I'm not into that. It's not okay. It's not right. It's not good. Well, we graduate. Suddenly marijuana is legal. Guess who's regularly smoking marijuana again? You see, people believe, and this is a problem with laws, with bad laws, people believe what is legal is moral. That's why people think abortion's okay. If it's legal, it must be moral. It must be okay. Same thing with marijuana. It's legal, therefore it should be moral. Same thing with alcohol. Legal, therefore it's moral. Well, depends on how you use it, right? And so this is really important for us to remember, because I've seen this damage friends of mine who had a past of using marijuana, who quit it, and now suddenly it's illegal after it really did damage to their own lives. And now here we are. It's doing damage yet again, but because it's legal, it's okay. Marijuana is known to be a major cause of psychosis, violence, and crime. There's an astronomical amount of data on this. In fact, a 2017 report of the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine showed that cannabis use is likely increasing the risk of developing psychosis. And the higher the use, the greater the risk. In fact, it's also linked to an increase in bipolar disorders, suicidality, depression, and social anxiety disorders. There was a book that came out in 2019. Parents, listen up. This is a great resource. Tell your children the truth about marijuana, mental illness, and violence. You need to pick this book up. We'll post a link to it in the show notes today. But here's the reality. Whether you're an educator, a parent, you need to understand what's happening in our nation with marijuana. As I've been diving deep into marijuana use, I'm thinking of a loved one who committed suicide and how the signs were all there, how the draw into drugs and hardcore drugs were all prevalent. We need to stop losing loved ones who are depressed, lonely, socially isolating themselves because of marijuana. Another 2018 study of people with psychosis in Switzerland actually found that almost half of the cannabis users became violent over a 3-year period. Their risk of violence was 4 times that of psychotic people who did not use cannabis. That was over a 3-year period. Their violence risk was 4 times higher than that of actual psychotic people, just because they were smoking marijuana. Higher violence rate than the people who are actually struggling mentally if you smoke marijuana. But here's something that you should understand. Marijuana has changed. And this is the thing that people aren't recognizing. 50 years ago, marijuana had a THC level of less than 2%. Marijuana that's being dispensed in legal dispensaries now has a THC level of 25% or higher in most cases. So the quantity that is actually impairing and impacting the brain and functions is much higher. So people who are pro-marijuana don't understand that what they may have smoked when they were kids occasionally, or maybe more than occasionally, isn't the same thing that people are smoking today. And so I challenge you, it's time for us to speak up. To not be afraid, friends, family members who say it's okay to smoke marijuana, and to watch for signs that other people might actually be partaking in that green leaf. In fact, I want to walk through more of those signs, so join me tomorrow on Trending Quotes. We're going to discuss how marijuana is impacting marriages, Perhaps you have a loved one who has been smoking marijuana or you think might be, or how to talk to your kids about it. Join me tomorrow here on Trending. Dr. Stacy Trasenkos will also join me to talk about what women have to say about marriage in Women's History Month. What do two women have to say about marriage during Women's History Month? How has feminism impacted marriage? For better or worse? This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. Thursday, I'm joined by Dr. Stacy Trasenkos. She's back, and we're together to discuss marriage and relationships. Join me daily at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.